It goes to a lot of things. Good morning from Berlin. The black zero that you're talking about, which is this rule that has been baked into the constitution crazily, in my view, that restricts any German government's ability to borrow money, is very much at the heart of this. Infrastructure is beginning to creak. I mean, Germans do have a tendency to exaggerate, and they always see the glass as being half empty. I can't think in the last 30 or 40 years in which a German has ever said to me, oh, things are going great. But now they really are miserable with justification. Socially, the country is divided, no different perhaps to other countries such as the US, the UK, France, and others. Economically, you've just heard a clip and you've done interviews on the difficulties, the industrial difficulties that this country has. But politically, it has got the most unpopular chancellor in living memory and a coalition government that is absolutely creaking at the seams and is staggering to get there for a year's time, which is when the general election should be held.
I don't want to just glibly agree with you, John, but is there any chance the centre can shore this up by actually changing the basic rule on that Schuldenbremse and actually spending their way out of a crisis? Or actually, are we not going to see that and it's going to lead to more from the left and more from the right, electorally just gaining on the centre?
As sure as anything ain't going to happen in the lifetime of this parliament. So for the next year, that's not going to happen. I mean, bizarrely, the three-party coalition has a finance minister, a guy called Christian Lindner, who's obsessed with keeping this debt burden. His party, the FDP, in this regional state of Brandenburg that voted yesterday, got less than 1% of the vote. So it is deeply unpopular, but it's not going to happen. That was going to have to wait, if it happens at all, because it needs a 2/3 of the majority to overturn a constitutional rule. That's going to have to wait to the next government. But there's a more interesting question, which is, will Olaf Scholz survive? He's bought himself some time with this tiny, tiny victory over the AfD yesterday. If the AfD had come on top, there was such a growing clamour within his party and beyond his party to do what the Germans now call do a Biden, which is persuade him to announce, not that he necessarily has to leave as Chancellor, but that he's not going to be candidate for the elections in a year's time.
Well, John, if Scholz has bought himself time, how much time does he need here is the question, because we just had another batch of data suggesting that the German economy could be sliding back into a technical recession. Doesn't that make it even more difficult for the Chancellor if the economic woes are magnified in the data?
It's incredibly hard politically and constitutionally to get rid of a chancellor. So the only way this government he's not going to be chancellor in a year's time, is if the government, the three-party coalition, collapses. And that's possible. It can't be ruled out. But in a sense, there's a sense of turkeys voting for Christmas because the three parties involved in the coalition are doing so badly. So if I were betting, I would bet on he would survive as Chancellor for another year until the end of September next year when the next general election is slated. But the question is his party going to come after him? The pressure is a little bit off now, thanks to yesterday's vote. But they know that he is deeply unpopular. And there is one guy waiting in the wings who has been incredibly loyal to him. He's the defense minister, plucked out of relative obscurity a couple of years ago, who has done incredibly well in modernizing Germany's military, in galvanizing the country, although it is still deeply divided on this issue, to support Ukraine. And his poll ratings are incredibly high, and his name is Boris Pistorius.